Inclusion helps to bring the support services to the learner rather than moving the learner to the services. So, the general demands of the impaired in the classroom are done successfully. Inclusive education will be successful when it provides support to both the learner and the educator. Providing support to individuals is only one way of making learning contacts and lessons accessible to all the learners. Support is also given when schools review their culture, policies, and practices in terms of the extent to which they meet the individual needs of the educators, parents, and the learners. Also focus broadly on the learning and teaching process by identifying and addressing learner, educator, and institutional needs. The learners in need of this support should join in special schools. The support must be again given back by the special schools. They and also serve as resource centers to schools nearby. Learners with impairments can be educated in regular schools depending on the intensity of the support required. Educators in regular schools should be able to adapt and modify their teaching and learning methodologies in order to ensure that they meet each learner's educational needs. The plan for lessons have to provide differentiated learning, teaching, and assessment activities to ensure effective multi-level teaching. The inclusive program ensures the impaired learners with new skills, technologies, and makes them achieve greater heights and develop a positive attitude and self-confidence. The people with hearing impairment usually find it very convenient to study in special schools and also cope up with the other students of regular schools. Thus, the inclusion becomes successful. Deaf education programs are programmed in according to each individual needs. Deaf educators provide such services in which deaf students receive in varying degrees based on their individual needs. It is essential for deaf education programs to be individualized to address the unique combination of needs for each student. Hearing impairment is defined as impairment in hearing, whether permanent or fluctuating, that affects a child's educational performance. Hearing impairment or deafness is when your hearing is affected by a condition or injury. Some people are born with a hearing loss while others may develop it as they get older. Most commonly, hearing loss happens with age or is caused by loud noises. In simple words, it can be defined as the inability to hear as a normal person. Hearing is the through which we can acquire knowledge and get linked with the surroundings. Different approaches are being used in schools to provide deaf educational services to the students. They are classified into 4 categories according to the ratio of contact between the deaf and the normal students. Inclusion. This is a popular and result-giving approach in which the students in need of deaf education mingle with the normal students to have interaction. Most of the schools use it only for selected students with mild to moderate deaf needs, so-called the best practice. Specialized services will be provided inside or outside the classroom depending on the type of impairment. Students are led into resource room, leaving the regular class to attend some interactive sessions to receive other related services that might require specialized equipment. This is referred to as speech and language therapy. Mainstreaming. It refers to the practice of educating deaf students in classes with the non-deaf students during specific time periods based on their skills. For the rest of the hour, the students are usually separated to another class. Segregation. Here, the students with the special needs spend no time in ordinary classes or with the normal students. Segregated students may attend the same school where regular classes are provided, but spend their time exclusively in a separate classroom for students with special needs. If their special class is located in an ordinary school, they may be provided opportunities for social integration. For example, eating meals with the non-disabled students. These students attend the class in separate schools also. Exclusion. Students who are seriously affected by this deaf state and cannot receive any information from the school are driven out from the school. A fact is that most of the deaf students are excluded from the school. In some developing countries, since there are no legal laws for these students, even now this stage persists. In the case of the student hospitalized, then they receive group instruction and not considered to be excluded. Thus, the above three factors are considered to be important in educational means. Regular education. This type of education where the hearing impaired children are placed in classroom with hearing persons so that improves in their skills and gets more knowledge. Most schools use it only for selected students with mild to moderate deaf needs, so called the best practice. Specialized services will be provided inside or outside the classroom depending on the type of the impairment. Students are led into resource room, leaving the regular class to attend some interactive sessions to receive other related services that might require specialized equipment. This is referred to as speech and language therapy. Special education classroom or resource room. It is the classroom for children who have difficulty in the regular classroom or who need extra help to achieve academically. Most of them do not have hearing loss at risk. Inclusion is an educational approach which helps in educating people who are in need of special education. This model is structured in a way that the normal students spend more time with the students with the special needs. The practice of this model implementation may differ the model which does not. It is most frequently used in schools to educate children with mild to severe impairments. Inclusive education differs from integration and mainstreaming, which are concentrated with disability and special educational needs. But inclusion is about the child's right to participate and the society's duty to accept the child. Inclusion rejects the use of special schools or classrooms to separate students with disabilities from the normal students. The inclusion provides students with disability skills they can use in and out of the classroom. Fully inclusive schools distinguish between general education and special education programs, but it is rare, so these schools are planned. Successful inclusion is associated with three requirements for the educators. First, adequate knowledge. Second, effective skills. Third, positive attitudes. A specific need exists to improve the perceptions of educators regarding the inclusion of deaf learners. They may provide appropriate programs that help educators meet the instructional, communication, and cultural needs of deaf learners in regular schools and also assist them in addressing issues related to self-concept and classroom support services to promote inclusion. In order to include deaf learners in regular schools, it is important to implement specific educational practices and strategies that will assist ordinary educators in providing appropriate support for deaf learners in attending the regular schools. The inclusive education principles ensure the right to educate all the learners in spite of their characteristics and difficulties so that society of justice can be created. It says that inclusion support all learners and educators and also full range of learning needs can be met. Inclusive policies and principles encourage the integration of deaf learners into mainstream education, maintaining that such learners can be successfully integrated in regular schools through the adaptation of the curriculum and by providing appropriate support wherever required. In inclusive settings, the classroom practices are expected to change so that it accommodates individual children. Now, for inclusion to be effective, all learners must actively belong to, be welcomed by, and participate in a school and community. That is, they should be fully included. Their diversity of interest, abilities should be welcomed and treated well. The principles of inclusion seeks the ideal situation of the education provided to the learners who are not identified to be impaired and need only some amount of support. That means the learners should be taught in regular schools and classrooms and not excluded from the normal school environment. The educators at regular schools need to teach all the learners, but they often are not sufficiently trained to support the diversity of the learners. The severity or complexity of the impairments of specific learners will determine the increase in support and resources required by the regular schools. In regular schools, partnerships need to be established with parents so that they can participate more effectively in the planning and implementation of different activities and so that they can play a more active role in the learning and teaching of their own children. Some schools have adopted the practice of placing groups of learners with the same problem in separate classes or units. The recent result shows improvement of these units and also their developing interaction. The topic of inclusion is mainly for the parents and the educators. The idea behind inclusive education is that students with special needs are also placed in the same classroom with others having normal educational needs. Inclusive education differs from integrity and mainstreaming, which tends to be concerned principally with disability and special educational needs and implied learners changing or becoming ready or deserving of accommodation by the mainstream. By contrast, inclusion is about the child's right to participate and the school's duty to accept the child. Inclusion rejects the use of special schools or classrooms to separate students with disabilities from the students without disabilities. A premium is placed upon full participation by the students with disabilities and upon respect for their social, civil, and educational rights. Inclusion gives students with disabilities skills they can use in and out of the classroom. Inclusion in education is an approach to educating students with special educational needs. Under the inclusion model, students with special needs spend more or all of their time with the non-disabled students. Implementation of these practices varies. Schools most frequently use them for selected students with mild to severe special needs. There are two types of inclusion. They are regular or partial inclusion. Second, full inclusion. It is the process by which the students with regular needs are being educated along with the normal students in a same environment to make them show their ability. Students with special needs are educated in these regular classes for nearly all of the day or for more than half of the day. The students receive any additional help or special instruction in the general classroom, and the student is treated like a normal member of the class. The other specialized services are provided outside the classroom, such as the special equipment may be so disruptive that the class is not clear. The student occasionally leaves the classroom. The student likes to attend some interactive classes in the resource room. The student wants other services like speech therapy, etc. Under this, the students with special needs are allowed in a standard classroom environment without testing or demonstration of skills. Individuals supporting full inclusion believe that all children belong in the same classroom environment. The main difference is that the students are always educated with the normal students, not partially like regular inclusion. Some educators say this might be more effective for the students with special needs. Full inclusion is the integration of all the students who require educational and behavioral supports and services to be successful in regular classes, and the elimination of segregated special education classes. Special education is a service that integrates with the environment, which hurdles the student to meet their individual needs. The approach to full inclusion is a controversy, and it is not understood or applied correctly. The common fact is that local educational agencies provide a variety of settings like special classroom and regular classes, which assign students to the system that help the students to achieve their individual educational goals. Students with mild or moderate disabilities are most likely to be fully included. Students with all types of disabilities from all the different disability categories have been successfully included in general education classes, working and achieving their individual educational goals in regular school environments and activities. The concept of inclusion can be simply defined as educating students in the regular classroom in spite of their disabilities to make them feel as normal children. While the feelings about inclusive education are still somewhat mixed, many studies show that children with special needs thrive in standard classroom environments for a variety of different reasons. Non-impaired individuals take language for granted. The language for non-impaired children comes so naturally, rapidly, effortlessly, and so early in life. The teachers' parents feel tired and helpless carrying out this task of developing language. However, one must be positive about language teaching because language teaching may appear difficult, but it is not impossible. With few skills at hand, positive attitude, and urge to take the child further from where they stand today are more than adequate ingredients for best results. On an interpersonal level, inclusive education allows children to develop friendship with their peers and feel less social tension about their disabilities. Some people believe that children who are placed in standard classroom environments generally have higher self-esteem than children who are isolated in different classrooms simply because they have special needs. Other studies show that children with special needs actually learn more in regular classroom environments provided they get the help and support they need in and out of the classroom when it comes to academic subjects. Groups that oppose inclusive education often maintain the position that children without special need will be forced to learn at a slower pace, but in practice, this is easily avoided by qualified teachers. Inclusive education is the practice that allows each child to feel respected, confident, and safe so they can learn and develop to their full potential. It is based on a system of values and beliefs centered on the best interest of the child. These values and beliefs will be shared by the schools and communities. Inclusive education is put into practice within school communities that value diversity and enrich the well-being and quality of learning of everyone. Inclusive education is carried out through a range of public and community programs and services available to all students. The need to feel included or to belong to a group is strong in most children. Children that are engaged to special classes or schools because they have special needs may develop self-respect and issues that could stay with them the rest of their life, making it difficult for them to feel like they belong as adults. According to the Disabilities Act, children with special needs have the right to be educated with the normal children. It also states that children should have access to the same general curriculum taught to students without disabilities. Children have the right to have quality education even though they have special needs. No single school has the right to refuse education to children and families who want the best for their child simply because they have a disability. Teachers use a number of techniques to help build classroom communities. Using games designed to build community, involving students in solving problems, sharing songs and books that teach community, openly dealing with individual differences by discussion, assigning classroom jobs that build community, teaching students to look for ways to help each other, encouraging students to take the role of a teacher and deliver instruction, focusing on the strength of a student with special needs. Many parents are making inclusive education for their children as the idea of inclusive education spreads and are likely to become more and more common to the benefit of many children with special needs. The principle of universal design is the starting point for an inclusive public education system. Here, the learning needs of a number of children are met by maximizing the usability of programs, services, practices, and learning environments. When this measure alone is insufficient to meet the needs of an individual student or group of students, accommodations are required. This is both an ethical and a legal requirement. The provision of inclusive public education is based on three principles. First, public education is universal. The education is provided equally to all students and it is done in an open environment which is common to all the students. Second, public education is individualized. It states that every student's success is based on the interest shown by the student to the subject they learn and also the response to their needs. Third, public education is flexible. It states that the educational methods tend to change. Teaching all the students. Educators should take several different methods to teach the same material so that information becomes more interesting to a greater number of students. Exploring multiple identities. Students are proud of them and excited by the world around them, will be more compassionate and understanding people. The same is true for educators. Preventing negative thoughts. Educators should take an active approach to prevent them from escalating into prejudices and negative biases. Promoting social justice. Students are good judges of what is fair, especially when they are challenged to consider issues of social justice. Educators should talk to them about issues of social justice and injustice in terms of fair versus unfair, respectful versus disrespectful. Choosing appropriate materials. Inclusive classrooms use books and materials that reflect accurate images of diverse people. Teaching and learning about cultures and religions. Educators should create curiosity and expand children's thought of teaching about others in a positive manner. Students should have the opportunity to learn other cultures. Adapting and integrating lessons appropriately. Educators should be flexible when using and adapting lessons. Many of the teachable moments are unplanned and unscripted. Inclusion is a process. It has to be seen as a never-ending search to find better ways of responding to diversity. It is about learning how to live with difference and learning how to learn from difference. The differences come to be seen more positively as a stimulus for learning among children and adults. Inclusion is concerned with the identification and removal of barriers. It involves collecting, collating, and evaluating information from a wide variety of sources in order to plan for improvements in policy and practice. It is about using evidence of various kinds to stimulate creativity and problem solving. Inclusion is about the presence, participation, and achievement of all the students. Presence is concerned with where children are educated and how reliably and punctually they attend. Participation relates to the quality of their experiences and must incorporate the views of the learners, and achievement is about the outcomes of learning across the curriculum, not just test and exam results. Inclusion invokes a particular emphasis on those groups of learners who may be at risk of marginalization, exclusion, or underachievement. This indicates the moral responsibility to ensure that those at risk are carefully monitored and that steps are taken to ensure their presence, participation, and achievement in the education system. To ensure the development of effective inclusive classroom practices, educators should be aware of the different characteristics of deafness in primary school learners. They need to consider different aspects of human development in particular cognitive development, which includes the developer and academic skills of the deaf learners in order to successfully include these learners in regular schools. Educators also need specific knowledge of adequate educational support strategies which should be used to correct and identify the unique needs of these learners in regular schools. Guidelines for educators of deaf learners attending regular schools are discussed in detail. Limitations will also be identified. It emphasizes the need for the researcher to name the most important limitations that will affect either the reliability of research findings or the extent to which the researcher can generalize. It is also important to name the possible consequences of these limitations. Finally, the limitations of the study were discussed and recommendations for further research were made, thus providing researchers interested in this field with suggestions regarding potential areas for further study with a view to enhancing the inclusion of the deaf learners in mainstream schools. The researcher believes that the current study will motivate the educators to include deaf learners in their mainstream classrooms and will assist them in understanding their roles and responsibilities in the inclusion effort. The findings of the research will provide educators with courage to experiment with new teaching strategies designed to involve deaf learners in the learning process and to ensure that the diverse needs of these learners are met.